Hi, I'm Shane.
And I'm Alex.
And this is the RPM podcast.
And hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. The Formula One season feels that little bit closer at last as we have the very first car launch of the season. It's the McLaren Mercedes MCL35M launch reaction from us. And we're just going to talk a little bit about the launch program itself and the car, any visual changes to the aero and chassis, etc. And of course, the livery.
So first things first, I think what we'll do is we'll talk about the launch itself from start to finish. So Alex, what was your main points taken away from that launch?
Yeah, I did watch the whole thing as it happened. I feel like, well, it started with a little video that they did, a sort of This is McLaren video, which they had released a few days prior. I feel like it was a bit of a shame that the video completely left out so much of the team's history, actually. I understand that they did it to emphasize the continuity of the original colors, and they had the "this is a happy team" kind of theme. But what McLaren is a culmination of all its prior successes.
Yeah.
And even if it does business very differently to, say, the Ron Dennis era, to leave it out without so much of a shot of its more recent World Championship winning cars is, I don't know, it feels a bit disappointing. I don't know why it was just like, here's the early Bruce McLaren days, and now here's us now, as if like the whole previous eras just kind of didn't happen. So I thought that was a bit of an odd choice, but I guess I kind of understand why they've done it.
Yeah, it's a shame they didn't include the whole story, like you said.
The
last 10 years for McLaren have been highs, lows. It's been a crazy adventure, and that's part of supporting a team, and that's part of the journey. That's what gets fans excited, that they've come from such a, they've had a tough like 3 or 4 years ago, and now they're on the way back. That should be what hypes up the fans. And to skip that almost generation out it was a bit strange, but like you said, not surprising.
I kind of understand why they've done it. They obviously are going for this. Look, we've got two very popular, smiley drivers, and we're a happy team, and we're not Ron Dennis, and everything's not great. We're very colourful and excitable. Yeah, okay, fair enough. But they're doing it their way. They want to be doing it now. So yeah, the nature of the launch under current conditions meant that it couldn't be the same kind of affair that we're used to, where we have like a live audience and lots of people standing together around the car looking proud of themselves. Instead, we had lots of distracting people behind them on webcams who were presumably told not to wave and be distracting, but did it anyway. And of course, we get the usual waffle about, yes, we're hoping for a good season and, all the stuff that you expect to hear. But it was exciting to see Daniel in McLaren colours, of course, and a nice reminder that the season isn't too far away. Yeah,
it's subtle things like what I'm looking forward to in the 2021 season is actually there's been some personnel changes amongst the teams, and sometimes I forget about that going into the new season, but car launches like this get me so excited. We're just over a month away now from the first practice session. I think it's about 38 days if at the time of recording. So it's soon, and we've still got 9 more car launches to go. So that time is going to feel really quick, especially with pre-season testing as well. So we've got a lot to get through in the next month and 8 days, and it's exciting stuff. And Daniel being in that car, wearing that uniform, is one of these things I'm very much looking forward to. And I know I speak on behalf of you and probably all the McLaren fans out there that this could be a very good year. Could be a very competitive year if everything aligns correctly. And I know that's easy to say for most teams, but new engine, new driver, very experienced driver, Daniel Ricciardo, proven race winner as well. So let's see what he can do for that team and what he can bring for his teammate. There's undoubtedly, he's the most experienced guy in that team now. So let's see what they can do together.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned it being potentially a very good season for McLaren. I was actually quite encouraged to hear a general vibe from Zach Brown and Andreas Seidel that they principally want to close the performance gap to the front, but they didn't make any explicit claims of, holding on to their P3 or regularly challenging for wins or podiums. They didn't really mention any of that. And that actually I found quite encouraging. I think it shows maturity because you always want to underpromise and overdeliver.
And overachieve, yeah, absolutely.
And we must remember that the team is still very much in the middle of their revival to the top of the F1 food chain and not near the end of it yet. So I was encouraged that they didn't make any grand statements and that they know that it could be good, but that they've also taken some risks in the way that they've adjusted the car to the new power unit at such a time. And I hope that it is a good season for them, but I'm glad to hear that they're not overstating it.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to remember that despite them finishing P3 last year, which was an incredible result, a lot of things had to happen for that to be achieved. And I don't want to say it wouldn't have happened under normal circumstances. That's not what F1 is all about. Obviously, Racing Point had that point deduction. Ferrari were well off the pace. So actually, just to try and close that gap to the front runners again, it would still be a great achievement to almost be in that P4, P3 range with Ferrari being back to competitiveness, and Racing Point or Aston Martin as they are now, which are looking to be quite competitive as well. It would be a great step forward for them to be in that top four, which I'm excited for. Let's not, like you said, let's not make claims about race wins, but if they can close the gap, they can capitalize on any mistakes, which they did a couple of times last year.
Yeah. Now, just before we get onto the car itself, just to touch a little bit on the launch, there was, as expected, a lot of noise on social media about how cringe it was and how we need to get on with it and get to the car launch. And I mean, partially inclined to agree, but weird F1 car launches are absolutely nothing new. I can only assume that a lot of people making those comments have never seen an F1 car launch before, because they've always been strange. I mean, McLaren once launched with the Spice Girls performing.
I know, I saw that the other day, actually.
Really weird Q&A session where they were asking, Baby Spice what she thinks of the car or whatever. I mean, I guess Jerry Halliwell, Ginger Spice, has obviously changed allegiances since then, now that she's married to Christian Horner.
Yeah, she could probably give a better insight to the car than what maybe others could.
Yeah. I remember Jordan once launched their car in like the Red Square when it was clearly freezing, and I've no idea why they did that. Their car had like no connection to Russia. I don't know why they did that.
I think it's
AlphaTauri last year. They had a fashion show, didn't they?
They did. Yeah, that was very strange. But that's their whole brand.
It wasn't really anything particularly unusual for them to have this whole palaver before they actually get to the car. That's become pretty standard procedure, unfortunately.
I think in today's era, in this COVID era we're experiencing, usually under normal circumstances, you'd have 100, 200, 300 strong crowd cheering, clapping, interacting with what you're saying. And at the moment, you're presenting this new journey, this new car to cameras. You're not getting that reaction. You're not feeling what the crowd's feeling. It's like you're just presenting to yourself. So I think that takes a lot of, I don't know what the word I'm looking for. It doesn't come naturally to a lot of people presenting, and to present to a camera and have no one on the other side, laughing or cheering or clapping. I think that in itself is quite awkward. So actually, if there was any awkwardness, it's because they're trying to do a car launch and hype up this brand new car to virtual fans, which is fantastic that they've put on that show. But that would have been a lot more less awkward, in my opinion, if there was a 400 strong crowd in the auditorium they usually present their vehicle in. So it is what it is. But like you said, F1 car launches, there have been far stranger ones. So
absolutely, definitely. But what we got was relatively normal by comparison. We ended up in they ended up in Grove Studios, didn't they? Which is owned, if you don't know, is owned by Mark Knopfler, Dire Straits.
Oh, okay.
It's funny. I had just finished working. Obviously, I've mentioned before I'm a musician, and I'm usually either teaching guitar students or sitting in the studio. And I finish working, and then I look at the car launch, and the next thing I see is like Daniel Ricciardo being taught how to play the bass and all this sort of stuff. And I was just looking at the mics that they were using. Yeah, I was just looking at the microphones they were using and looking at the instruments and stuff. I don't know if we'll ever hear that song they were supposedly working on. I got the impression that it probably requires a lot of work. But that was the weirdness that we got from the McLaren launch, them recording a song together. And I don't know, whatever. It was a bit of fun, I guess. But
we've got 9 more launches to do, and then we'll do like maybe our top launch video. I'm not quite sure, or the top 5 strangest launches of the year. We'll see how they go. But like you said, moving on to the car itself and any visual changes to the aero chassis and then the livery itself. So the livery is probably the easiest one to comment on at the moment, because it's very similar, which I'm not complaining about at all, because I like the orange and the blue and the tint of black and the different colors at the back. It's a very similar livery, and I think that'll be a common theme throughout this year, potentially. Obviously, we've got big changes happening with Racing Point, and we'll leave those big changes to those teams. But I like the McLaren livery, and I'm glad they've kept it the same.
Yeah, it's not a huge surprise to see the same colours. They have kept their rainbow from the previous season, which I quite like. This is the livery overall is fine. I don't think it's my favourite McLaren livery ever, but it's pretty nice. I don't mind it. And I guess the major things to point out is that there's no Mercedes branding, which is interesting. I think that's because of their customer contract that they have with them. Doesn't require any actual branding. It's been the case before. Racing Point were in a similar situation. They had Mercedes engines, but they didn't have any actual Mercedes branding as part of their visual presentation. So I think that's just part of their contract that they have. Some people may have been expecting to see more grey, more silver, big Mercedes logo on it. Obviously, that's not to be. And not a whole lot to say about it, really. Just looking at the image of it here, it's just very, very similar. A bit more blue on the nose. That's about it, really.
Yeah, like you said,
lots of sponsors.
Yeah, lots of sponsors. And the bit which actually stood out for me is what you've just mentioned, that there's a little bit more blue on the nose, which creeps up the side of the nose instead of it just being on the end like it was last year. And as for the Mercedes logo, like you said, different teams have different contracts. Williams had the Mercedes logo plastered over everything. Their kit,
that's
their
because
uniform,
they needed
their
something
overalls.
to put on their car.
Yeah, of course they did. Whereas, McLaren have chosen, well, for whatever reason, have not gone down that route, which is fine. It, shows they're independent as much as they are a, customer team. So, yeah, that's pretty much it for the livery itself.
Not loads to say on it, really. Yeah, it's just more of the same. Not necessarily a bad thing.
No, not at all. Moving on to the aero, obviously McLaren have adopted that new engine, so the car actually structurally at the rear of the car does look quite different, and you've got those slight alterations in the regulations coming in. So I'm looking at the top-down view now of the McLaren, and the floor does cut in at the rear quite significantly compared to last year, which looks quite nice. It's starting to feel starting to look more like a supercar, like with these weird, strange angles. I quite like it. And so with the floor where it was last year, it almost came out to the edge of the tyre, so it was a bit boxy in my opinion. So I like how that looks. And the Mercedes engine is different. So I think the rear of the car is a little bit thinner compared to last year. Obviously they did some testing last year of the front wing, but this is the first time they've got hands on with the engine. So yeah, I think it looks fine. I mean, I'm not a aerodynamicist or whatever they are. So I'm just commenting on what I can see. But very similar, very small changes, but it does look good.
Yeah, despite the similar name, obviously just adding the M on the end of it, is probably going to be one of the more different cars that we see compared to the previous season because of the change of engine. And I think the team has claimed that the number of new parts on the car is actually similar to that when building the MCL35. And we know that last year's car was strongest in high-speed corners and under braking, like what we saw at Monza.
Yep.
Hopefully this will continue to be the case. As we know, Ricciardo in particular often favours a bit of a dive up the inside, like we saw when he was at Red Bull. So hopefully we will see another car that is strong under braking. This new setup that they have here on the MCL35M will presumably try and gain something with their slow speed corner weaknesses. James Key in an interview is talking about issues that they had in regard to certain weather and grip conditions, probably relating to issues that the driver suffered in windy conditions in particular. I think both drivers mentioned that the car was quite difficult to drive under certain weather conditions like that. You've already mentioned that the rear floor kind of it tapers back, and it's aerodynamically a lot simpler. You can see if you look at the old photo, I've got the top down of both of them together, and the old one has got all these veins and splits at the back, and you can see that the regulations have changed that a lot, much less downforce coming from the floor. And yeah, tapers back, as does the Coke bottle shape of the engine cover that you mentioned as well. It seems to be that the engine cover tapers back earlier, but also has this sort of bulge in it, which is maybe something to do with the split turbo that the Mercedes engine has. I believe the Renault engine has all of it together in one package right at the top, whereas the Mercedes engine is split and has more components that are closer to the cockpit, and thus has resulted in changes to the shape. So it's got a bit more of a bulge in the middle of it and has more of a Coke bottle kind of look. And like you say, it looks kind of sleeker, and overall, I think I prefer the overall look of it. There's more channels and lines going through from off the halo and down the engine cover towards the back, and so more air is being channeled down towards the rear of the car through that engine cover area. So it's an interesting decision, and hopefully the risk that they've taken in getting this new engine doesn't cost them too much in the process. So we've seen that they've made a lot of the changes through the development of last year. Like, for example, the nose is very similar to what we saw last year because they made many of those changes already. One thing that is new, I think, for this year is the airbox, which seems to be bigger and rounder. Again, presumably to accommodate the changes in the different type of cooling that the Mercedes engine requires.
Yeah, I think you've hit on every topic I wanted to talk about. The car looks good, and I hope that with the adoption of the Mercedes engine, that they can make that step forward they so wish to do. We've seen it in the past where teams have switched engines and they've not had a very successful season. But given the reliability and the credibility of that Mercedes engine, I'm really hoping that actually it's going to be a smooth transition. We want to see McLaren at the top of the field and fighting for really decent points, race in, race out. And hopefully they can target those slow speed corners, because that's where they did suffer last year. And they had a really good package last year. So if they can just build on what they weren't so good at, it could be a really genuinely good car.
I guess the only other changes is I believe there are changes to the brake ducts at the front. There are less complicated aerodynamics to it at the bottom half of the brake duct, I believe. And again, more on the floor. If you look at the section on the nose, like between the cockpit and the front suspension, you can see that there's less vanes, less kind of slots, but a complicated aero on the floor and on the sort of tray, if you like, that the car appears to
they've
sit
tried
on.
to. That's part of the rules, isn't it, going forward, that they wanted to simplify the aerodynamics of the car itself, and that will again be enhanced for the 2022 season. So this is almost like a bit of a stepping stone in the right direction before we get to those completely change of those specifications. But hopefully, with all teams adopting these simpler designs, it brings the field closer together. And those who have,
hopefully,
put the time and effort in, absolutely, that's the idea. We don't want to go backwards. God forbid, but it does look good. I'm liking the kind of the minimalist look, because I can see more by there being less. I can see what's going on in a car because there's less of these weird and wonderful veins everywhere. Like, the Mercedes they had last year, it was very bespoke, curves and slots and slits, and it was, impressive to look at, but also very hard to understand. Whereas simpler design, you can almost start to understand it or start to receive a better understanding of the car they're driving.
And it's a little bit easier to see when upgrades have been made, and you can see where those changes have taken place, rather than, we put an extra little slot in the rear wing, and maybe that'll produce a sort of 0.8% downforce advantage in this particular kind of corner or something. So it makes it a little bit less obtuse. Absolutely.
It's good that you mentioned earlier that they tested the new front wing concept last year to try and get some reliable data. For, they changed the front wing to adopt to the Mercedes engine, completely different aerodynamic design, tested it last year, got the statistics and the data they needed, and hopefully that plays dividends this year by them not having to worry so much about the front wing, and they can focus on other areas of the car itself.
One final thing to point out, I think, in regards to the launch, is that it was also revealed by Daniel Ricciardo that he's signed a 3-year deal with McLaren, which is a pretty big statement. He's even said himself that he thinks that McLaren is his best chance at getting a title. So that's a pretty big statement of intent from him, and
that's got to be one of the longest contracts on the grid so far.
Yeah, it probably is. Yeah, even Lewis Hamilton don't have a contract that long.
Yeah, for a season which is going to be very interesting. Obviously, the 2021 and the 2022 season is going to be very interesting because so many drivers are out of contract at the end of 2021. Ricciardo is fully putting everything into McLaren, and fair enough. They're proven race winners. They're proven world championship cars, and Daniel Ricciardo could be that perfect fit. So I didn't know that, actually. That's really good that he's signed a 3-year deal. It's almost shocked me a little bit, but that goes to show how much confidence he has in the team.
Exactly. Yeah, looking forward to it. Fingers crossed.
So there we have it, the brand new McLaren Mercedes for the 2021 season. What did you think of the livery? Have we missed anything? If you're watching on YouTube, let us know if we have by commenting on the video. If you haven't done already, please subscribe to us on YouTube and give us a like rating. If you're listening to us on a podcast app, you can also give us a subscribe and give us a rating as well. We love to see those ratings coming through. Only a couple of them at the moment, but each one gives us a little bit more of a fulfillment and know that we are doing stuff which you enjoy. If you haven't done already, please follow us on Twitter at RacePerMinute. We've currently got an F1 countdown, which is going down very well. We're getting down to almost a month, which people are getting excited about, seeing their favorite drivers and all that kind of stuff. We run polls regularly, so get involved with that. If you have any questions, you can email us at info@raceperminute.com. And if you really like what we do, you can support the show by visiting us on Patreon at patreon.com/raceperminute, where you can donate as little as £1 a month to help keep the show running. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.
See you later.